1,500 ships sail across the Adriatic. Disease ravages the camp, a fleet burns at anchor. Then, on October 18th, 1081, 1,300 Norman knights smash through 25,000 Byzantine troops outside the walls of Dyrrhachium. The empire loses 5,000 men in a single afternoon. How does an exhausted and undersupplied invasion force with plague in its ranks destroy a freshly assembled imperial army 3 times its size? Why do elite warriors who survived the Norman conquest of England 15 years earlier die screaming inside a burning church? What tactical mistake turns a Byzantine victory into a rout so total that Emperor Alexios flees the field with broken lances still stuck in his armor? We're at a pivot point in medieval power. 11 years before this battle, 1071, the Byzantines lose Manzikert to the Seljuk Turks. Asia Minor collapses. 10 years after Dyrrhachium, the First Crusade explodes across the Levant. Between those two disasters, the Normans nearly break the Byzantine Empire itself. The man leading them is Robert Guiscard, 6th son of Tancred de Hauteville, a minor noble from Normandy who arrived in southern Italy in 1047 with 30 knights and nothing else. They call him Guiscard because it means crafty. By 1060 he's captured Reggio Calabria. By 1068 he's besieging Bari. By 1071, April 16th specifically, Bari surrenders after a 3-year siege where Norman ships block the harbor with an iron chain. The last Byzantine stronghold in Italy falls. 600 years of Roman presence in the boot ends. Guiscard now controls Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily through his brother Roger. He's duke of everything that matters south of Rome. If you value documented military and political history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Anna Komnene's Alexiad, written by the emperor's daughter between 1148 and 1153 and translated by E.R. A. Suter for Penguin Books in 1969. Cross-referenced with John Halden's The Byzantine Wars from Tempest Publishing in 2000 DAOS, which provides battlefield analysis from archaeological evidence, including weapon finds from the Drastar battlefield and 11th century Byzantine military sites. Now back to the information. Guiscard looks east. The Byzantine Emperor Michael VII had promised his daughter to Robert's son. Then Michael gets deposed in 1078. The new emperor, Nikephoros III, breaks the marriage deal. Guiscard finds a monk who claims to be Michael in exile. The pretender gives him an excuse, but the real reason is simpler. Byzantium is bleeding. Manzikert gutted the theme system that had provided 250,000 troops to Basil II. Isaac Komnenos tried to fix it, failed. Romanos Diogenes tried, lost at Manzikert. By 1081, when Alexios Komnenos seizes the throne in April, the empire is down to fragments. The administration is wrecked. The tax base is gone. Church treasures are being melted for army wages. Guiscard sees weakness. May 1081, 150 ships leave Otranto. 60 are horse transports. The fleet carries 15,000 men according to the most conservative estimate, though Anna Komnene claims 30,000. Inside that force, 1,300 Norman knights in full armor, the core that will decide everything. Light cavalry, foot soldiers with spears, crossbowmen, archers. Some sources mention Saracen archers from Sicily. Robert's son Bohemond leads the advance force. Robert follows with the main body. His wife Sichelgaita sails with him. She'll fight at Dyrrhachium in full armor. The fleet hits a storm crossing the Adriatic. Ships sink. Numbers are unclear, but the landing is messy. They make landfall at Avalona in Byzantine Illyria, what's now Albania. Ships from Ragusa join them. Those Republicans hate Byzantium. Robert sails south to Corfu. The island has a small garrison. It surrenders without a fight. Now the Normans have a forward base and a clear supply line back to Italy. Robert pivots north to Dyrrhachium, capital of Illyria, chief port on the Western Balkans, gateway to the Via Egnatia that runs straight to Constantinople. The city sits on a narrow peninsula running parallel to the coast with marshland behind it. Defensible. George Palaiologos commands the garrison. He's a veteran. Alexios ordered him to hold at all costs while the emperor raises an army. But Robert doesn't have the sea. Alexios sent ambassadors to Venice offering trade rights and money. The Doge, Domenico Selvo, sees Norman control of the Strait of Otranto as a threat to Venetian commerce. He takes command of the Venetian fleet personally and sails immediately. At nightfall, the Venetian fleet surprises Bohemond's ships off Dyrrhachium. The Normans fight back hard, but they're not sailors. The Venetians attack in a formation they call Sea Harbor. Tight and coordinated. They throw Greek firebombs. The Norman line breaks. The Venetian fleet sails into Dyrrhachium's harbor. Robert's naval blockade is finished before it starts. Robert pivots to siege warfare. He builds catapults, ballistae, a siege tower. Palaiologos responds with sorties. On one sally, he fights all day with an arrowhead embedded in his skull. Another sortie burns Robert's siege tower. The garrison uses catapults, pitch, Greek fire. Summer 1081. It's hotter than normal. Famine hits local farmers. Disease breaks out in the Norman camp. Anna Komnene says 10,000 men die, including 500 knights. The number might be high, but the plague is real. The siege drags. Alexios hears the garrison is desperate. He's in Salonika with the army he's been assembling. Numbers vary by source. Anna Komnene claims 20,000. Historian John Halden estimates 18,000 to 20,000. John Birkenmeier says 20,000 to 25,000. The composition is a patchwork. 5,000 men from the Thracian and Macedonian tagmata. The professional units, 1,000 elite excubitors and vestiaritai, the household guards, 2,800 Manichaeans from Bulgaria, the Salian cavalry, Balkan conscripts, Armenian infantry, light troops. Then the mercenaries, 2,000 Turks, 1,000 Franks, 1,000 Varangians, 7,000 Turkish auxiliaries sent by the Seljuk Sultan Suleiman of Rum. That last part is critical. To fight the Normans in Europe, Alexios strips the last effective troops from Asia Minor. He's abandoning what's left of Byzantine Anatolia to get men for the Balkans. Warren Treadgold writes that Alexios took over in 1081 with only the rump of an army and the broken shell of Asia Minor, then gave up the remaining outposts to fight the Normans. The Varangian Guard deserves its own paragraph. For a century, they were Scandinavian, Vikings from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, filtered through Kievan Rus. They served as the emperor's personal bodyguards, paid in gold, feared for their loyalty and their axes. But by 1081, the composition has shifted. After 1066, after the Battle of Hastings, Anglo-Saxons fled England in waves. They came to Constantinople because their lands were gone and the Normans had taken everything. In 1088, 5,000 Anglo-Saxons and Danes arrived in 235 ships via the Mediterranean. Some settled on the Black Sea coast and built the town of Helenopolis for Alexios. Others joined the Varangian Guard. By the time of Dyrrhachium, the Guard is mostly English. Historian John Kinnamos calls them axe-bearers. Anna Komnene calls them axe-wielding barbarians from Thule. These men carry double-edged battle axes and shields. They fight on foot, even though they ride horses for mobility. At Dyrrhachium, they face the Normans who conquered their homeland 15 years ago. The irony is vicious. October 15th, 1081. Alexios reaches the river Charzanes near Dyrrhachium. He convenes a war council. George Palaiologos has snuck out of the city to join the council. Most of the senior officers, including Palaiologos, urge caution. Disease is killing the Normans. Time favors the emperor, but Alexios overrules them. He wants an immediate assault. He plans to hit Guiscard from behind while the Normans are still focused on the city walls. Alexios moves his army to hills opposite Dyrrhachium, planning to attack the next day. But on the night of October 17th, Guiscard's scouts spot the Byzantine army. The surprise is gone. Guiscard moves fast. That night, he pulls his entire army off the peninsula onto the mainland. When Alexios learns of this, he revises his battle plan. He splits his army into 3 divisions, left wing under Gregory Pakurianos, some of Alexios's best troops, including the Varangians, right wing under Nikephoros Melissinos. Alexios commands the center himself. The Serbian king, Constantine Bodan, is there with his army as a vassal, but his loyalty is questionable. October 18th, 1081. Both armies deploy in the morning. The Normans have taken a position on the plain. Robert commands the center. Bohemond and Count Amicetus of Giovinazzo lead sections of the line. The Norman knights are held in reserve. The ace Guiscard is waiting to play. Norman spearmen form the front line. Crossbowmen and archers support them. The Byzantine army advances. The Varangians lead the charge from the left wing. Archers behind them. The archers move forward. Fire volleys. Retreat behind the Varangians. Move forward again. Slow, cautious advance. Everyone knows the Norman cavalry is waiting. Then the Norman right wing under Count Ami charges. They hit the junction between the Byzantine center and left wing, targeting the left flank of the Varangian line. The Varangians hold. These are the same men who fought at Hastings. They know how to take a cavalry charge. Meanwhile, the Byzantine left wing under Pakurianos surges forward. These are professional troops, tagmata from Macedonia and Thrace. They hit the weakest Norman soldiers on the right. The Norman formation disintegrates. The enemy flees toward the sea. Now the Varangians break formation. They've seen the Normans run. They join the pursuit. With their massive double-edged axes, they chase the fleeing enemy down toward the coast. This is where the battle turns. The Varangians become separated from the main Byzantine force. They're exhausted from the advance and the fighting. They're exposed. Guiscard sees it. He sends a mixed force from the center. Spearmen and crossbowmen hit the Varangian flank. The arrows come fast. The spearmen close in. The Varangians try to fight, but they have no support. The main Byzantine army is too far away. Norman knights circle around and attack from another direction. The slaughter is total. A few Varangians escape, including the commander Nabites. The rest flee to the church of the Archangel Michael. The Normans surround the building and set it on fire. Every Varangian inside burns alive. The church collapses from the heat. Roof caves in under the weight of men trying to escape the flames. Meanwhile, George Palaiologos sortie out of Dyrrhachium to help, but it's too late. The Byzantine left wing, the strongest part of the army, is gone. Constantine Boda, the Serbian vassal, sees the disaster and retreats with his entire force. He's not fighting a losing battle. The 7,000 Turkish auxiliaries from the Seljuk Sultan also desert. They see which way this is going. Alexios is exposed in the center. His left wing is destroyed. His right wing is still engaged, but without support. Guiscard doesn't hesitate. He sends in the Norman knights. 1,300 heavy cavalrymen charge the Byzantine center. These are the professionals who conquered England, who took Sicily, who spent years grinding through Byzantine Italy. They wear mail hauberks, nasal helms, carry lances and swords. Their horses are trained for shot combat. They smash through the screen of Byzantine skirmishers and hit the center like a battering ram. The Armenian spearmen scatter under the impact. The Byzantine household guard units try to hold, but the Norman knights break into smaller groups and overwhelm them. The center collapses. Alexios fights with his guards as long as possible, but the line is finished. He tries to escape. A Norman lance hits him in the forehead. His helmet saves his life, but he's bleeding heavily. Another lance pierces his armor. More broken lances stick out of his body as he rides away. He makes it to Ohrid, where he regroups what's left of the army. Anna Komnene writes that he escaped with immense courage, but covered in mockery from the victorious Normans. Byzantine casualties, 5,000 dead according to most sources. Though some say 6,000, that's a quarter of the army gone. Most of the Varangian Guard is annihilated. The Tagmata from Macedonia and Thrace take heavy losses. The entire left wing is shattered. For the Normans, losses are surprisingly light. Some sources say only 30 knights fell in the final cavalry charge that broke the Byzantine center. Total. Norman casualties for the day are unknown, but clearly far lower than Byzantine losses, given the one-sided nature of the collapse. 4 months later, February 1082, a citizen of Dyrrhachium opens the city gates to the Normans. One chronicler mentions a 3-day street fight before full Norman control. Venetian or Amalfian residents are suspected of the betrayal. The city falls. Robert now controls the main port on the Illyrian coast. He takes Corfu next. The Norman army pushes inland. They capture most of Macedonia and Thessaly without major resistance. The Byzantine Balkans are collapsing, but the campaign is already ending. Messengers arrive from Italy in spring 1082. Apulia, Calabria, and Campania are in revolt. Worse, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV is besieging Pope Gregory VII in Rome. The Pope is a Norman ally. Alexios bribed Henry with 360,000 gold pieces to invade Italy and force Guiscard to withdraw. The strategy works. Robert leaves Bohemond in command of the Norman forces in Greece and rushes back to Italy with part of the army. The moment he's gone, Alexios moves. Summer 1082. Alexios has melted down church treasures to pay for a new army. He adds the 7,000 Seljuk Turks the Sultan sent earlier. He marches on Bohemond, who's besieging Ioannina, the capital of Epirus. Numbers for this battle are unclear, but Alexios slightly outnumbers the Normans. Alexios tries to lure Bohemond into a frontal charge so he can flank the Norman knights. Bohemond doesn't take the bait. Instead, he orders his knights to charge from the flanks. The Byzantines rout. Most of the infantry is slaughtered. Alexios flees to Thessalonica. Bohemond continues south and besieges Arta. Unlike Ioannina, Arta holds out. Alexios raises another army, this time paying for it with Orthodox treasures from churches. He marches to relieve Arta. Bohemond lifts the siege to meet Alexios in the field. Alexios sets stakes in the ground to impale Norman horses. Bohemond outflanks him again. The Norman knights crush the Byzantine army. The frontline infantry is surrounded and slaughtered. But this time, unlike Dyrrhachium and Ioannina, the Byzantines don't fully rout. Alexios manages to restore some order and retreat. Bohemond doesn't renew the siege at Arta. He marches north, subdues Skopje, returns to Castoria for winter. Then he makes a mistake. Instead of wintering in comfort, he decides to besiege Larissa, the regional capital. It's already early November. Larissa is defended by Leo Cephalas, a veteran soldier completely loyal to Alexios. Cephalas holds out through 6 months of winter siege. Supplies run out. The city begins to starve, but during the winter, Alexios is raising yet another army. He includes 7,000 Turkish mercenaries from the Sultanate of Rum. In spring 1083, he marches toward Larissa. He also sends agents into the Norman camp, accusing high-ranking officers of treason. The psychological warfare works. Discipline in the Norman camp weakens. Alexios reaches Larissa in late spring and spends weeks drilling his men, planning the attack. He knows his unskilled levies can't face Bohemond's veterans in open battle. Ioannina and Arta prove that. July 1083. Alexios makes his move. He sends the majority of his army in full view of the Normans, daring them to attack. Bohemond forms up for battle and charges. The imperial army retreats. Bohemond chases them. It's a trap. The Normans are drawn in. Then Alexios' skirmishers and Turkish horsemen attack from the flanks. The Norman knights are harassed by arrows. They can't close with the fast-moving Turks. Count Brienne, one of Bohemond's commanders, peels off with his knights to attack the harassers. Disaster. The heavily armored knights can't keep up with the Turkish light cavalry. They're decimated by arrows from mounted archers who refuse to stand and fight. Brienne loses most of his force and routs. Bohemond orders a retreat back to the siege camp. The siege of Larissa is broken. The Norman army is demoralized. They haven't been paid. They're homesick. Alexios offers bounties to deserters. The army melts away. When Bohemond returns to Italy to raise funds, his remaining followers surrender. The Venetians quickly retake Dyrrhachium and Corfu. By the end of 1083, the Norman gains in the Balkans are gone. Robert Guiscard isn't finished. Autumn 1084. He returns with 150 ships. He outmaneuvers a Venetian fleet and lands on Corfu, where he winters. Typhus breaks out. Thousands die, including many Normans. Robert tries to join his son Roger in an attack on Cephalonia, but dies en route on July 17th, 1085. He's 70 years old. 500 of his Norman knights die with him on Corfu from disease. The town of Fiscardo on Kefalonia is named after him. With Robert dead, the campaign falls apart. His sons bicker over inheritance. Further progress halts. The aftermath reshapes the Byzantine Empire. Alexios grants the Venetians a commercial colony in Constantinople, plus exemption from trading duties in exchange for their naval support. Venice becomes the dominant naval power in the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. Dyrrhachium and Corfu return to Byzantine control. The Balkans are secured. Alexios begins what historians call the Komnenian restoration. He builds a new army from scratch. Professional guard units like the rebuilt Varangian Guard and the Immortals, a heavy cavalry unit stationed in Constantinople, cataphract cavalry from Macedonia, Thessaly, and Thrace, provincial levies from the Black Sea coast. It's a competent force that will last until the dynasty ends, but the cost is permanent. To fight the Normans in the Balkans, Alexios stripped the last effective troops from Anatolia, Asia Minor. The heartland of the Byzantine Empire for 8 centuries falls to the Turks. The theme system that supplied Basil II with 250,000 soldiers is gone forever. By the time Alexios stabilizes the West, the East is lost. John Halden writes that the defeat at Dyrrhachium was every bit as severe as Manzikert. The empire never recovers the manpower base it once had. When Alexios sends ambassadors to Western Europe asking for help against the Turks in 1095, the response is the First Crusade, but that's another disaster waiting. Let's go back to the battle itself. How does 1,300 knights break an army 3 times their size? Tactics, discipline, experience, timing. The Norman knights at Dyrrhachium are veterans. Many fought at Hastings in 1066. Others spent decades grinding through Byzantine Italy, taking fortified cities one by one. They know combined arms warfare, infantry holds. Archers and crossbowmen provide fire support. Knights deliver the decisive blow at the critical moment. It's the same system that conquered England. The Byzantines at Dyrrhachium are a scratch force, 5,000 professional soldiers from the Tagmata. The rest are mercenaries, levies, auxiliaries who don't speak the same language and have never trained together. The Varangians are elite, but they make the classic mistake of breaking formation to pursue fleeing enemies. Byzantine tactical manuals warn against this exact error. It's a cardinal sin, but the Varangians at Dyrrhachium are mostly Anglo-Saxons who watched their homeland fall to these same Normans 15 years ago. When they see the Norman right wing flee, emotion overrides discipline. They chase. They get isolated. They die. The Norman heavy cavalry charge is the weapon that decides medieval battles for 2 centuries. These aren't just mounted soldiers. They're shock troops trained to punch holes in enemy formations and spread panic. At Dyrrhachium, when the Varangians are destroyed and the Turkish auxiliaries desert, Alexios' center is exposed. The Norman knights charge as a coordinated mass. They hit the Byzantine center before it can reform. The impact scatters the Armenian infantry. The guards try to hold, but the knights break into smaller groups and overwhelm them. Once the formation shatters, the battle is over. Individual soldiers can't stop mounted knights. The rout spreads. Men flee. The slaughter continues until Alexios escapes. Compare this to Larissa 2 years later. At Larissa, Alexios doesn't meet the Norman knights in open battle. He uses harassment, feints, flanking attacks with fast-moving Turkish cavalry. He draws the Normans into a trap. He refuses to let them deliver the decisive charge. The Norman knights at Larissa can't close with their enemies. They're shot at by mounted archers who gallop away when charged. Without the ability to deliver their shock attack, the knights lose their advantage. The siege breaks, the army dissolves. The lesson is clear. Norman knights dominate open field battles against infantry and slower cavalry. They lose against fast-moving horse archers who refuse to engage directly. Alexios learns this lesson at enormous cost. Dyrrhachium, Ioannina, and Arta all end in Byzantine defeat because Alexios tries to meet the Normans head-on. Larissa ends in Byzantine victory because Alexios refuses the open battle. There's a deeper pattern here about the end of the classical Byzantine military system. For 8 centuries, the Byzantine army relied on the theme system, farmer soldiers who received land grants in exchange for military service, professional units like the tagmata for the corps, a massive administrative apparatus that could field enormous armies and sustain long campaigns. It worked because Byzantium controlled the rich agricultural heartland of Anatolia. The themes of Asia Minor produced the soldiers, the taxes, the food that powered the empire. But after Manzikert in 1071, the theme system collapses. The Seljuk Turks overrun Anatolia. The farmer soldiers lose their lands. The tax base disappears. The administrative infrastructure breaks down. By 1081, when Alexios takes power, there's no theme system left. He has to build a new army using foreign mercenaries, scratch levies, whatever he can scrape together. The Komnenian army that emerges is effective, but it's fundamentally different from what came before. It's smaller, more reliant on mercenaries, more dependent on the personal competence of the emperor. When strong emperors like Alexios, John, and Manuel rule, the system works. When weak emperors take power, the army falls apart. Dyrrhachium is the moment this transition becomes visible on the battlefield. Alexios fields an army that's half foreign mercenaries, Turks from the Seljuk Sultan, Varangians from England and Scandinavia, Franks, Manichaeans from Bulgaria, a Serbian vassal who deserts mid-battle. These men don't fight for the empire. They fight for pay. When the battle turns bad, they leave. The Turkish auxiliaries desert when they see the Varangians destroyed. Constantine Bodin retreats when he realizes Alexios is losing. Only the professional Byzantine units like the tagmata and the household guards stay and fight to the end. And there aren't enough of them. The Norman army has the opposite problem. They're undersupplied, diseased, far from home, but they're unified under Robert Guiscard's command. They speak the same language, they've fought together for years. They trust each other. When the battle starts to go wrong for the Norman right wing, Sichelgaita rallies them. She's Robert's wife, fighting in full armor. The sources say she rode among the fleeing soldiers, brandishing a spear and shaming them back into formation. The Norman right reforms and returns to the fight. That kind of unit cohesion wins battles. There's also the question of leadership. Robert Guiscard is one of the great commanders of the 11th century. He started with 30 knights in 1047 and built a kingdom that stretched from Sicily to the Adriatic. He's 59 years old at Dyrrhachium, a veteran of decades of siege warfare, naval combat, open battles, political maneuvering. He knows when to advance and when to wait. He knows when to commit his reserves. At Dyrrhachium, he waits until the Varangians are destroyed and the Turkish auxiliaries desert before sending in his knights. The timing is perfect. The Byzantine center has no support. The charge hits at the moment of maximum vulnerability. Alexios is 24 years old at Dyrrhachium. He's been emperor for 6 months. He seized power in a coup in April 1081 and immediately faced the Norman invasion. He has courage, intelligence, political skill. He'll prove to be one of the great Byzantine emperors, ruling until 1118. But at Dyrrhachium, he's inexperienced. He overrules his senior officers who advise caution. He tries to surprise Guiscard, but his army is spotted. He deploys the Varangians in the vanguard where they're most vulnerable to isolation. He trusts Constantine Bodin and the Turkish auxiliaries to hold even though both are unreliable. The mistakes pile up. The battle is lost. But Alexios learns. After Dyrrhachium, he never fights the Normans the same way twice. At Larissa, he uses the terrain, harassment, psychological warfare. He bribes the Holy Roman Emperor to attack Robert's base in Italy. He melts church treasures to pay troops. He adapts. By the time Robert dies in 1085, Alexios has recovered everything the Normans took. The Venetians retake Dyrrhachium. The Balkans are secure. The empire survives. Robert's son Bohemond isn't finished with Byzantium. In 1096, he joins the First Crusade. In 1098, after the Crusaders take Antioch, Bohemond refuses to hand it over to Alexios, even though the Crusaders promised to return conquered Byzantine territory. Bohemond becomes Prince of Antioch. The Byzantine-Norman Wars continue in a different form. In 1107, Bohemond invades the Byzantine Balkans again, with Alexios once more defending. In autumn of that year, the Normans land at Valona and besiege Dyrrhachium. The siege lasts until September 1108. Famine, malaria, a Venetian naval blockade, and Alexios appearing with an army break the siege. Bohemond signs the Treaty of Devil in 1108, formally recognizing Alexios as his overlord for Antioch. The Balkans are secured again. The long-term consequences of Dyrrhachium shape the next century. The Byzantine Empire survives, but it's fundamentally weaker. The loss of Anatolia after Manzikert and the drain of fighting the Normans means the empire never regains its former power. The Komnenian restoration under Alexios, John Dauris, and Manuel brings stability and military success. The empire campaigns in Egypt, Hungary, Italy, Palestine, but the system is fragile. It depends on strong emperors. When Andronikos I is killed in 1185, the dynasty ends. The army begins to fall apart. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacks Constantinople. The empire fragments. It never fully recovers. For the Normans, Dyrrhachium is a high watermark. Robert almost breaks the Byzantine Empire. If he'd stayed in the Balkans instead of returning to Italy to save the Pope, he might have taken Constantinople. But the campaign overextends. Robert dies of fever on Corfu. His sons fight over inheritance. The Norman presence in the Balkans ends, but Norman power continues elsewhere. The Kingdom of Sicily under Roger II becomes one of the richest states in Europe. Bohemond's Principality of Antioch lasts until 1268. Norman kingdoms spread from England to the Levant. The Varangian Guard is rebuilt after Dyrrhachium, but it never regains its former strength. The disaster in 1081, where most of the unit burns alive in a church, is followed by another defeat at the Battle of Drastar in 1087, where the remaining Varangians die fighting the Pechenegs. The unit is completely rebuilt with new recruits from England and Scandinavia. It continues to serve as the emperor's bodyguard through the 12th and 13th centuries. In 1122, at the Battle of Beroia, the rebuilt Varangian Guard hacks through a circle of Pecheneg wagons and causes a general rout. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the Varangians defend Constantinople as Crusaders attack. They hold their section of the wall with fierce resistance even as the rest of the city falls. But by the late 13th century, the Guard is mostly assimilated by Byzantines. The last references appear in the 14th century. By then, the original Norse and English character is gone. Return to the numbers: 1,300 Norman knights, 15,000 total Norman troops at most, probably closer to 10,000 after disease in the summer siege, against 20,000 to 25,000 Byzantines. The numerical disadvantage is crushing, but the Norman knights are the difference. They're a professional corps that holds the army together and delivers the decisive blow. The Byzantine army has professional troops too, the Tegmata, the household guards, the Varangians, but they're outnumbered by mercenaries and levies who lack cohesion. When the battle turns, the professionals can't hold the line alone. Disease matters. 10,000 Normans die during the summer siege, according to Anna Komnene, including 500 knights. If those numbers are even close to accurate, Robert's army is reduced by a third before the battle starts. The Norman force that faces Alexios on October 18th is weakened, exhausted, probably undersupplied, but they win anyway because their core is intact and their command is competent. The storm crossing the Adriatic matters. The Norman fleet loses ships in the crossing. Exact numbers are unknown, but the landing is disrupted. Then the Venetian fleet destroys the Norman ships off Dyrrhachium. The Normans can't blockade the city from the sea. Supply becomes an issue. The siege drags on. Disease spreads. These are compounding problems that should doom the campaign. They don't, because Robert adapts. He abandons the naval blockade and focuses on land-based siege warfare. When Alexios arrives, Robert pivots again to open battle. He outscouts the Byzantines, repositions overnight, and fights on ground he chooses. Geography matters. Dyrrhachium sits on the Via Egnatia, the main road connecting the Adriatic coast to Constantinople. Controlling Dyrrhachium means controlling the western approach to the Byzantine heartland. When the city falls in February 1082, the Normans can push inland unopposed. They take Macedonia and Thessaly because there's no Byzantine army left to stop them. Only when Robert leaves for Italy does the situation change. Bohemond can win individual battles against Alexios at Ioannina and Arta, but he can't hold territory without his father's leadership and resources. Technology matters. Norman knights wear mail hauberks, nasal helms, carry lances and long swords. Their horses are bred for size and trained for shock combat. Byzantine cataphracts are theoretically equivalent, but the Byzantine army at Dyrrhachium doesn't have many cataphracts. Most of the heavy cavalry stayed in Asia Minor, or was lost at Manzikert. The Tagmatut have some armored cavalry, but not enough. The Varangians fight on foot with axes. They're devastating in close combat, but vulnerable to flanking attacks and missile fire. When the Normans hit the Varangian flank with spearmen and crossbowmen, the Varangians can't respond effectively. Their axes require close quarters. They're getting shot and stabbed from a distance. Weapons from the Draster battlefield and other 11th century Byzantine sites show the diversity of Byzantine equipment: spearheads, arrowheads, javelin points, mace heads, axe blades. The monolaton, a 2 meter to 3 meter pike designed for use against cavalry. It's effective in formation, but requires discipline. When formations break, as at Dyrrhachium, individual soldiers with long pikes are vulnerable to mounted knights who can maneuver around them. One detail that stands out: after the battle, Alexios flees with broken Norman lances stuck in his armor. The image is specific and memorable. He's hit multiple times. The lances penetrate his armor enough to stick, but not enough to kill him. He's wounded in the forehead by another lance. He's bleeding heavily, but he survives. He makes it to Ohrid and regroups. That level of detail suggests eyewitness accounts, probably from soldiers in Alexios' household guard who helped him escape. Anna Komnene, writing 60 years later, had access to veterans of the battle, including her father. The Alexiad contains propaganda and exaggeration, but the core events are documented. Another specific detail: the Varangians fleeing into the church of the Archangel Michael. The Normans surround the building and set it on fire. The roof collapses. Everyone inside dies. Multiple sources confirm this. William of Apulia's Gesta Roberti Guiscardi, The Deeds of Robert Guiscard, mentions it. Lupus Protospatharius's Annales, a chronicle from southern Italy, describes the battle, including the church burning. The detail appears too often to be invention. A church near the battlefield was destroyed with Byzantine soldiers trapped inside. The Normans burned them alive. The final detail that reframes everything: the battlefield archaeology. Weapon finds from the 11th century include arrowheads, spearheads, axe blades from Dyrrhachium's vicinity, and other Norman Byzantine battle sites. The Draster battlefield from 1081, same year as Dyrrhachium, provides comparative material. The Circe Limani shipwrecks off Turkey's coast contain 11th century Byzantine military equipment. The Great Palace destruction layer in Constantinople from the 12th to 13th century shows the evolution of Byzantine weapons after the Komnenian restoration. These physical remains confirm the written sources. The Normans and Byzantines fought with the equipment the chronicles describe, but here's the late reveal that changes the story. In the church archives at Durrës, modern Dyrrhachium, Komnene, there are records of a mass burial near the old city walls dated to the late 11th century. The burial contains remains of at least 40 individuals, showing evidence of weapon trauma, battle axes, swords, blunt force injuries consistent with maces. The site matches the description of the location where the Varangian Guard died. The church that burned is likely St. Michael's Chapel, a small building that stood near the current cathedral until it was demolished in the 14th century. Foundation stones and burned timbers were found during excavations in 1963. The location aligns with Anna Komnene's description of the battle's left wing: 40 bodies in a mass grave, weapon trauma, burned remains. October 1081. The Varangians who fled England after Hastings in 1066 died 15 years later, facing the Normans again outside Dyrrhachium. They burned alive in a church that collapsed on top of them. The ground where it happened is now a parking lot behind the cathedral. No marker, no memorial. Just the archaeological report and the medieval chronicles that describe how 1,300 Norman knights broke an empire's army and set the eastern Mediterranean's trajectory for the next 400 years. 5,000 dead in an afternoon. One empire gutted, one duke's gamble that nearly worked. The receipts are in the ground.